What's going on, everybody? Mortem here, this time bringing you 5 of my favorite villains in video games. Because, as we all know, an interesting villain can really make or break a game, and well-done villains are surprisingly few and far between, as it's very easy to make villains that are a generic bad guy simply because you need someone to do the bad thing to give you a plot. But every once in a while, we get villains that are able to resonate with you, which really helps to make stories feel more alive. All of that said, before we dive into this, these are in no particular order, and I will be spoiling basically every game that I'm referencing here, and the names of the games should be in the timestamps along with the villain. So if you don't want spoilers for those games, don't watch that part, I suppose. And it must be said, with so many great villains in gaming, you could definitely add more to this list, and these certainly aren't even all of my favorites. But with no further ado, let's actually dive into this thing and start talking about some of these guys. So first up, we have Isair and Madae. I am probably butchering their names, to be honest, but they are the two Cambions from Icewind 2. And what I like about these two as villains are that they're kind of just right. While they might be going about it in a pretty wrong way, what strikes me about these two, which are a brother and sister Cambion, is that their cause is very much so relatable and understandable. If anything, they're the ones who have been spurned and provoked and are simply reacting. But nonetheless, they are committing atrocities along the way. Because these two Cambions were born to the 10 towns of Icewind Dale, and being effectively demon spawn as Cambions, they were less than trusted their entire lives until they were eventually blamed for the death of their mother, which they did not do, which caused them to run off, slowly build a sort of nation of outcasts, which then attempted to negotiate with the 10 towns to give all of the outcasts in the area more of a say, if you will, in their own lives, and the 10 towns responded by poisoning them via holy water in their baked goods as a slight. So having been pushed out and provoked basically their entire lives, they decided to fight back, which brings us to the story of Icewind Dale 2. And I think that makes these two such a great set of villains because it's very easy to relate to them as a result. And there's a decent argument to be had here that they really didn't do much wrong that the 10 towns are not also guilty of. But moving on to our next entry, we have Thaos X Arcanon from Pillars of Eternity 1. An interesting character, but mostly because I'm so into the universe of Pillars of Eternity. But Thaos is impossibly old, and he has killed an impossible amount of people over his years in an attempt to ensure the continuation of the Engwithin gods, while at the same time kind of losing sight of what he was going for in the first place, in my opinion. You see, Thaos was one of the chief architects that turned the Engwithin people into the gods of the Pillars of Eternity universe. Thaos himself, along with some others, stayed behind to ensure the spread of their new religion, dedicated to the gods they had just made themselves, to bring a sort of peace and prosperity to the world as opposed to the chaotic mess it was before this, in terms of people warring and fighting and everything. And for the most part, this was successful. However, eventually someone finds out that these gods are a lie, or at least that they were created rather than always there, and starts talking and spreading about this, and in response, Thaos does everything in his power to keep this a secret, committing untold atrocities along the way, until we get to Pillars of Eternity, where he serves as the final boss. But an interesting thing about Thaos to me is that he lived so long through so many lifetimes that I think it's safe to say he kind of became the thing he was trying to prevent, which is a classic enough trope, but when you think about it, he set out along with all the other Engwithins to stop all of this madness, and in order to cover that up, he just did it again. He's responsible for plagues sweeping nations, handing nations over to tyrants who abused their people because it kept its secret safe, incited civil wars. If anything, Thaos is responsible for the exact chaos that his pantheon was supposed to be preventing. And in that way, he's very single-minded in his mission. But he's an interesting character simply because of the ideas around someone living so long that they kind of lose sight of their own humanity and staring too long into the abyss, shall we say. But that brings us to number 3 on the list, and this is Saren from Mass Effect 1. Mass Effect 1, I think, has the best villain because it's one person that you can kind of have a conversation with, talk to, whereas the Reapers as a whole are a little more ambiguous. They are a threat to be afraid of as a faction rather than a person. But Saren, initially thought to just be a traitor specter, is actually being slowly mind controlled by the Reapers, and over the course of the game you can see him come to that realization, before trying to fight it and potentially even taking his own life, only to be turned into a sort of machine monster by the Reapers anyway. So while it's easy to say that Saren isn't the villain, but rather the Reapers controlling him are, which is true, it's very interesting to see someone struggle against the indoctrination, which becomes a large part of the series as a whole as you move forward. Because in that way, Saren's a bit of a unique case. And again, if you kind of point some of this stuff out to him, he can be persuaded to end it himself rather than give in to the Reapers, which is a pretty powerful moment in that game. And all in all, it makes him a pretty great villain. For number 4 on the list, though, we have Jacque de Aldersberg from The Witcher 1, or just Alvin, really. He certainly has a bit of a complicated story, potentially involving some time travel as well, actually, but Jacque de Aldersberg is the Grand Master of the Order of the Flaming Rose, which is at first portrayed as a benevolent group of knights who will take anyone, train them, feed them, clothe them, as long as they provide service and act as a chivalrous knight to people in need. Unless, of course, you're a non-human, who they seem to view as terrorists. But the goal of Jacque de Aldersberg is to forcibly unite people under his banner to prepare them for the White Frost, a coming apocalyptic event part of the Witcher universe, which is interesting enough in and of itself, but I referred to him as Alvin a moment ago because we actually meet him as a little boy throughout the story who has uncontrolled magical abilities. And over the course of the game, Alvin is subject to a kidnapping, multiple threats to his life, and all in all just the horror of what's to come, all while his magic elder blood is giving him visions of the coming apocalypse. And later into the story, Alvin teleports and disappears, which due to his magic abilities can be through space and time. And later, when you kill de Aldersberg, you find an amulet on him that you gave to Alvin earlier in the story, implying that he was Alvin the entire time. And it's certainly a complicated story, but I think it's a cool plot twist of someone who is having visions of an impending doom and doing everything they can to stop it, even through definitely questionable means. But overall, just a really cool story that makes it easy to see why The Witcher became such a big franchise. But that brings us to our final entry on the list, and what would a favorite villains list be without Kreia from KOTOR 2? A fantastically complicated character that is very difficult to sum up in a few minutes, but basically, she is a very powerful force wielder who hates the Force. She hates that it attempts to bring balance by killing basically anyone and everyone. She hates that people become so dependent on it that as people they become useless without the Force. She wants you to be trained to basically be able to make a decision on your own without relying on the Force so much, all while sort of guiding you down a specific path and expressing views on the Force from a viewpoint that we don't really see anywhere else in Star Wars media. And you take all of those themes on top of some really top-notch writing for it, and you've got a villain that is exceedingly popular as a villain. And if you're interested in hearing more about her, I would check out some of the lore and specifics about the conversation, or just play through the game yourself and experience it, as she really is a fantastic character. But that, guys, is going to wrap up 5 of my favorite villains. I certainly hope you enjoyed the video, and by all means let me know some of your favorite villains down in the comment section below, and don't forget to like and subscribe while you are at it. But regardless of all that, truly, thank you so much for watching. I really do appreciate it. May you wander in wisdom and have an amazing day.